Welcome back. The Liberal Party of Canada has released their housing plan and what they plan to do going forward to curb higher housing prices and the unaffordability that is happening in the housing market. And I'm going to start by saying that there's some things in this plan that are really, really good. Really well thought out. But just like any political plan, there's some things that are really not well thought out either. And my big criticism of this is going to be, why now? That's the question. Why now? Why not when you could have done this previously? But before we get into all the details and get into what is actually in their Liberal housing plan, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where one lucky winner is going to win $5,000 to put towards maybe buying a house, or paying down their mortgage, paying down their debt, or maybe putting it into their savings so that they can eventually afford the down payment for a house. And there's some things in this plan that could definitely help with that. But in order to win, you have to subscribe. So go ahead. It's free, it's easy, it's definitely worth it. And I'll see you on the other side of the intro. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit, product, penalty, price in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss the Liberal housing plan. And let's start first and foremost by talking about the fact that there's actually some really good stuff in here, assuming that the Liberal government, if reelected, actually delivers. But the question is, why are they doing this now? Why is this a conversation that is being had when there's an election in progress, rather than one that was being had in the first 6 months of the year when housing prices were increasing and the things that they are suggesting could have really helped a lot of Canadians? So that's my first question. The second thing I'm going to point out from this whole thing is that a lot of what's in here is treating the symptoms of the housing problems, not the actual cause, which is a lack of supply in the types of properties that people are actually desiring. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to show you the actual Liberal website that shows the Liberal housing plan, go through some of the suggestions that they've made, talk about the good and the bad, and give you my overall take on what they're suggesting and what they plan to do if reelected. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's jump into the Liberal housing plan, a home for everyone. Now, again, there's some really good stuff in here, and I'm not going to hit every single topic, but I am going to hit the highlights. Now, first and foremost, if you go to their website, you can take a look at the full plan. They have some videos. Obviously, they have thought this out pretty well. They waited a few more days than the other parties in order to put this forward, and they have done a pretty good job of marketing it. Now, again, the question here is why now? Why not previously? But nonetheless, at least they're doing something to move this cause forward. Now, the big problem here with Justin Trudeau and his whole philosophy with respect to housing and monetary policy and whatnot is he has said, forgive me if I don't pay attention to monetary policy. And the big thing here is that all of this that they're suggesting is it's really great for the symptoms and for helping families. But the big thing he needs to be watching is housing costs, costs of living, and making sure that those expenses don't go up faster than incomes increase. But that being said, if you're going to treat the symptoms and not the causes of the problem, which is low employment, low interest rates, high inflation, and all of those things, there's actually some really good suggestions in here. There's also some really bad ones. So let's start first and foremost with the afford a down payment faster suggestion here. So one of the things that they're doing, which is really great, is they are suggesting that they're going to create basically a hybrid RSP TFSA account where you get the same sort of tax deductions you would get from an RSP, and you would ultimately end up having the same ability to pull it out like you would out of a TFSA in order to make your down payment. Now, what that means is you wouldn't have to pay back your RSP over a 15-year period. You could basically pull the money out tax-free. Now, there's some problems with this. First and foremost, if we want to talk about vote buying, like he did in his first election where he got elected and made marijuana legal, well, this is very much vote buying of the same demographic of the marijuana smokers, which is young people under 40, because this opportunity would only apply to people under 40. So if you're over 40, for people like my wife, for people who I know are in the process of buying a home for the first time in their early 40s, sorry, you're SOL on this. So kind of a crappy thing that they aren't going to allow this for people over 40, but if you're under 40, this is an awesome thing. And this is, again, something that I believe is really well thought out and would be a really great thing for Canadians if the Liberal Party were to get elected and to deliver on this promise. So that's a good one. Now let's take a look in contrast to that to maybe one that is not so good. So a rent-to-own program for Canadians where landlords are encouraged to commit to a lower than market rent in order to help Canadians build up a saving for down payments. Landlords must commit to ownership in a 5-year or less term and proper safeguards in place to protect the future homeowner. So rent-to-own programs, let's talk about that for a second, because here's the reality of rent-to-own programs. They're typically designed for landlords to charge higher rents with the concept of taking the higher rents and putting a portion away for the down payment for the rent-to-owner. And ultimately, they are designed in such a way that they're made so people are not able to realize on the actual property. So what ends up happening is the landlord gets to keep all that extra money that they charged in higher rents, and more often than not, the landlord wins. Because people who get into a rent-to-own situation are typically not in a situation where they're going to be able to change their borrowing circumstances enough to actually be able to realize on a property in a 5-year period. In fact, it usually takes 7 to 10 years for somebody to change their buying circumstances enough in order to actually realize. So rent-to-owns, as a general rule, are something I don't recommend. And here we have the federal government, the Liberal Party of Canada, suggesting that we put more Canadians into that sort of situation where they aren't going to be able to realize on properties. So this, as much as it seems like it might be a good idea for the uneducated and the uninformed, is actually a really bad idea. And it's promoting a product that typically is detrimental to Canadians as something that is a good idea. So this is a bad one. I don't like that one. So going back and giving a balanced view, another good one here, saving on your closing costs. So increasing the first-time homebuyer tax credit from $5,000 to $10,000, which puts about a $1,500 rebate into your tax returns, which would help with closing costs. So that's pretty good. Obviously, there's provinces where closing costs are exceptionally high. $1,500 isn't going to make a huge dent into it, but I think this is something that is definitely a good thing if you were to do it. But again, this is treating a symptom, which is high closing costs, by not getting at the problem. It's by basically creating a tax incentive rather than fixing the problem of high closing costs. Now, here's one that I think is going to be really, really hard for them to deliver on, and that is a decrease in insurance premiums of 25%. Okay, so think about this. You have 3 mortgage insurance providers, CMHC, Sagan, and Canada Guarantee. These companies, 2 of which are private, basically are insurance companies, and they do business based on actuarial science. So in other words, what they do is they determine how much they need to take in premiums in order to cover potential future losses. So if the federal government is saying to these 3 organizations, you're going to need to reduce your insurance premiums by 25%, well, guess what? They may not be able to make up for their potential losses in the future. So I don't know how they would do this. I don't know if the federal government is going to subsidize this, and that would be a pretty big chunk of money for them to subsidize, or if they're just going to say, hey, you guys have to charge lower premiums, but that would be a major mistake. Either way, Canadians get burned, especially if they put CMHC into a circumstance where they aren't able to pay out in the event of a major downturn in the economy, or if we end up getting taxed more so that we can pay for premiums for first-time homebuyers who are putting less than 20% down. So probably not a realistic one in this case. Now, getting into one that would affect the market and would affect housing that's available for rents and housing that's available for sale, we would establish an anti-flipping tax on residential properties. In other words, requiring properties to be held for at least 12 months. Now, this one is pretty ridiculous because here's what happens. You get dilapidated houses that home flippers go in, buy, fix up, and put back on the market so that they are saleable. And basically creating an anti-flipping tax on residential properties would actually reduce the number of properties available that are livable for Canadians. So this is just a tax on people who are making money flipping properties. Obviously, there is some connotation around flipping properties that insinuates that home flippers are part of the problem when it comes to real estate. They are part of the reason why housing prices go up, but they're also part of the reason why there's more housing available, especially because a lot of flippers turn flips into rental properties. So this one is short-sighted as far as I'm concerned. And the next one I want to talk about, and probably the last one I want to talk about, is introducing a home buyer's bill of rights. So this is one we've talked about in the past. We've talked about blind bidding and why it exists, right? Because blind bidding is one of the things that has been criticized in the recent real estate market because people perceive it as being something that increases housing prices too fast. But let me paint another picture for you. Let's say that the federal government eliminates blind bidding and instead we turn to auctions like Australia did. And we end up in a situation where people are standing on the front lawn and making $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $100,000, $200,000 decisions in a matter of seconds because they get caught up in a live auction process. And what we know about Australia's experience is that this creates a problem for the real estate market. It actually increases housing prices faster than blind bidding does. So this would be a bad idea when it comes to the real estate market. Now, here's the other thing is home buyer bill of rights. These things, home buying, real estate practices are something that is regulated provincially, not federally. So this would be something that they would have to get past the provincial governments because it would be taking the ability to regulate real estate out of the hands of the provinces, which I think most provinces are probably not going to be happy with in the long term. So here's the deal. There's some really good things in this home buyer plan. There's some really crappy things in this home buyer plan. But the reality of it is this, is why now? Why weren't these changes made in the last 6 months when they were needed? Why are they being used to buy votes? And what are the chances that they're actually going to follow through? Because the only promise that the Liberal government has made that I can remember them following through on in the last several years is that marijuana promise. And everything else has pretty much been left as is, with the exception of a few things. So when I look at something like this, I think they've made a lot of promises that don't make sense. I think they've made a lot of promises that they can't deliver on. And I think they've made some really good ones that they should have made 6 months ago. But regardless, why is this being used now to buy votes? And can we really rely on them doing this? So that's my thoughts on this. The home buyer plan that they've put out, I'm not sure if it's going to be a great thing in the long term or a horrible thing. I'm not even sure if most of it's going to be possible. But at the end of the day, I certainly hope that the good things are things that all parties look at and say, yeah, we'd be willing to do this if we get elected. And the bad things, they look at it and go, rent to owns for massive amounts of Canadians, probably not a good idea. We're not interested in that either. So this isn't a political video, not designed to make it so you are convinced to vote for one party or the other. This is just talking about the home buying plan that the Liberal government has put into place and is proposing. And ultimately, I hope the good things that come out of it, the bad things don't. And hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit that like button so more people like you can see this video, and don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers. I sincerely hope you, yes you, the person who waited to the end of this video, I hope you are the winner. Cheers. We'll see you on the next one.